Okay, hello everyone. This is Shauna LaRue Marai from ICF. I'll introduce myself in 1 second. I want to welcome you to HUD's Office of Housing Counseling. This is the webinar for network agency eligibility and evaluation for intermediary organizations, state housing finance agencies, and multi-state organizations. I will now turn it over to Lorraine to introduce herself and to welcome all of you from HUD.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Shauna. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're located. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today out of your busy schedule. This is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars that we're providing, and it's the result of surveys and stakeholder meeting feedback that we received from intermediary groups and state housing finance agencies, where you're looking for a little bit more guidance on your network management and administration. So we really appreciate that feedback and look forward to completing this series and giving you some better guidance on managing your networks. Today's webinar is going to focus primarily on eligibility requirements when you're adding agencies to your network. And it's very valuable information because not only is it information you use at the time when you're adding agencies to your network, but also as long as that agency is participating in HUD's housing counseling program through your network, that agency needs to continue to meet all of the eligibility criteria that we're going to go through today. And so I hope you sit back and you find this to be a great learning experience. We're looking forward to communicating with you, and I'll turn it back over to Shauna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lorraine, and I appreciate the context for this particular webinar. So going over that was super helpful. Again, I'm Shauna LaRue Marai. I work at ICF International. We are a technical assistance provider to HUD's Office of Housing Counseling. And I'm joined here today by the following presenters. Aisha?
Hello, everyone. This is Aisha Williams, Managing Director with ADW Associates, and we are a subcontractor to ICF, working with Shauna and others to bring this content to you on behalf of HUD.
Thank you, Aisha. Now the HUD staff. Javon?
Hello, everyone. My name is Javon Bly. I'm a housing program specialist in the Office of Outreach and Capacity Building, and I also work on new applications as well.
Rhonda.
Yes, hi. This is Rhonda Rivera. I'm the Division Director of Outreach Capacity Building from Santa Ana, California, and welcome.
And Ruth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Roman. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Housing Counseling.
Thank you so much. I would like Chantel, who is the technical expert here, to talk about how to ask questions today. Chantel?
Sure. Thank you, Shauna. For those of you joining us today with audio through your telephone, you have 2 options to answer questions. One, you can raise your hand right next to your name that's found in your GoToWebinar toolbar, and at designated times throughout the webinar, we will unmute those who have their hands raised, and you will be able to ask your question verbally. Your second option is that you can write a question in the question text box, which is also found in your GoToWebinar toolbar. Now, for those of you joining us today through audio through your computer, we ask that you write your question through the question text box, and that designated times throughout this webinar, we will read your question out loud and answer your question that way.
Okay, thanks so much. So as Lorraine mentioned, this is the 4th in the webinar series specifically for oversight agencies, which are intermediaries, the HFAs, and also multi-state organizations. We started last October with roles and responsibilities for agencies and provided you with the link here so that you can listen to the presentation that way, and it goes through the slides. Network monitoring was held, we actually did this twice, in December as well as in February on how to monitor your network, and we provided you with the link there. And then more recently, June seems like recent to me, grant administration on how to manage your grant, and we provided you with the link. So we are going to talk today, as folks mentioned, about network agency eligibility and evaluation, which is primarily on the HUD approval criteria. The final one, at least in this particular series, is coming up actually on November 19th, which is a date that is not listed here, but please mark your calendars. You will get something very soon to register. And it's the companion piece called Right Sizing Your Network, and that's to go over how to best meet the needs of your housing counseling program within your network. And this is right sizing, growing your network, reducing your network, whatever would be the best fit for you and given your jurisdiction and your market. And then here's a reminder that all of the webinars, not just those recordings that we provided you on the prior slide, all of the recordings are available here on the Office of Housing Counseling's training archive site. And if I can turn it back over to Aisha, who's the main presenter today, if she can talk about the agenda and get us started here on the content.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. So today's webinar, as everyone has said, will focus on the eligibility criteria and the interpretation of those criteria, or HUD's guidance on those criteria that oversight agencies need to use when adding agencies to their network. As Lorraine mentioned, these same criteria and guidelines should also be used when evaluating an agency's ongoing participation in your HUD Housing Counseling Network. Before getting into the criteria, we'll start with a review of key concepts from webinars 1 and 2 in the series. Then we'll move into the process, roles, and responsibilities that are important when assessing agencies' eligibility to participate in your network. From there, we'll get into each of the eligibility criteria before wrapping up with some Q&A. Okay, so this diagram will look familiar to everyone who's been participating in other presentations in this series. The graphic that you see depicts the relationship between HUD, the oversight agencies, and your affiliate housing counseling agencies. And again, the target audience for today's presentation includes agencies who have oversight responsibilities, which the intermediaries and state housing finance agencies there are depicted in the middle part of the graphic. And the goal is for the folks in the middle part of the graphic to understand how they need to understand the three criteria and conduct evaluation of those eligibility criteria for agencies who are currently in their network or looking to newly join their networks. I want to mention here that you also see in that middle part of the graphic multi-state organizations and LHCAs with branches. So what I want to say is that multi-state organizations and LHCAs are not required, they don't actually add affiliates to a HUD housing counseling network in that sense. But they do have branches, as I mentioned. And so in this particular case, the way this is relevant for you guys is that you need to make sure that all of your branches also meet the criteria that we're going to discuss today. So again, on an ongoing basis, you all will need to make sure that your entire agency, including the branches, are all living up to the eligibility criteria we'll discuss today. In the first introductory webinar in this series, we briefly touched on HUD eligibility requirements and recommended steps to take when evaluating eligibility. There are 15 eligibility requirements for participation in a HUD housing counseling network, and those requirements can be found in Chapter 2 of the HUD Handbook. These criteria are also used, again, when evaluating agencies that are already in your network. We're going to talk a little bit about the 6 steps that were also mentioned in those first couple of webinars. We're going to talk a little bit about just 6 recommended steps to help you really be successful in evaluating those agencies, in addition to some required steps. So we're going to make just some recommendations to you that, if implemented, will ensure your success as well as the success of agencies in your network. And then finally, we will go into some roles and responsibilities. Again, these were mentioned in webinar 1 and webinar 2 in the series. You can always go back and look at those, but we'll review some key points about those here. Okay, so now let's get into the overarching process and just sort of setting the stage for how all of this work takes place. There are 3 stakeholders in the process for bringing an agency into a HUD Housing Counseling Network, into one of your networks. There's HUD, there's the Oversight Agency, and there's the Housing Counseling Agency that is looking to newly join or that is already participating. It's really important that everyone is clear about their roles to ensure a smooth and successful process. As the cartoon illustrates on your screen, when colleagues are confused about what they're supposed to be doing, they end up stepping and tripping all over each other, as you can see in the front graphic there, because they're playing the wrong position. Ultimately, playing the wrong position in this particular instance means that you'll drop the ball when it comes to being able to satisfy the quality assurance requirements that HUD expects oversight agencies and their network agencies to fulfill. We won't be able to satisfy our clients, the customers who receive our services, and then the finances, the support of the HUD Housing Counseling Program is jeopardized. So that's why it's really important that at the beginning stages of this, that everyone understands each of these criteria and how they are supposed to be applied and interpreted and then fulfilled on an ongoing basis. So the diagram that you see on your screen actually depicts the overall process through which the Housing Counseling Agency joins an oversight agency's HUD Housing Counseling Network. And again, the term oversight agency here is just being used to refer to intermediaries and state housing finance agencies who are bringing new agencies into their networks. In step 1 on the diagram, you can see that the Housing Counseling Agency applies for membership in your network. You, as an oversight agency, are then required to have an application so that the Housing Counseling Agency can actually apply, and that application needs to reflect HUD eligibility criteria, which we're discussing today, as well as any of your own required criteria that you know will make an agency a good fit for your network. In addition to listing the eligibility criteria, you also should provide on that application information about the required documentation as well as the specific steps that an agency will need to take to complete that application process. So again, you are required to have a formal application through which an agency can now take that first step in the process to join your network. In step 2, the oversight agency will review the application and any accompanying documentation for compliance with HUD criteria as well as your own network criteria. If the agency is not approved, and so you're asking the question at the beginning of step 2, is the agency already HUD approved? If they are not, you would complete a vetting process through which you would assess newly assess essentially all of the HUD eligibility criteria to be sure that they are actually met or that the agency meets or exceeds those criteria. If the agency is already approved, which you see on the right-hand side of your screen here, you still need to vet the agency and verify that even though they were approved at some point in the past, you need to verify that they can still document their compliance with the HUD eligibility criteria. So either way, you need to definitely be vetting and assessing the agencies and whether or not they newly meet those criteria or continue to meet those criteria. And again, to making sure that they also meet your own eligibility criteria for joining your network. And the third step down here, what you see is that you will either, really quite simply, approve the agency to join your network, or you will reject the agency's application to join your network. On the left-hand side here, we'll see what happens if there's a rejection. You would, I'm going to address the second bullet, the second and third bullet in the bottom left box first. You can certainly tell them what is wrong, what are the deficiencies in their application, and you can provide, if you'd like, limited technical assistance to the agency, or you can refer the agency to HUD or to another oversight agency to try another avenue to join. Sometimes technical assistance is appropriate, for instance, if it's just a minor issue. However, if there are really significant issues where the agency is clearly just in violation of HUD's criteria or not meeting them, then it is perfectly appropriate to say that at this particular time, you're not going to provide technical assistance because they need to just really work on reviewing those eligibility criteria and review HUD's website. In the case where an agency has already been HUD approved and you are assessing their application and you determine that they do not meet the HUD eligibility criteria as they had previously indicated, or maybe as they previously did, it is important to go ahead and notify your HUD point of contact. We don't want folks to notify HUD every single time you reject an agency, but if there is an agency that is just woefully out of compliance with HUD criteria and they are already participating in the HUD housing counseling program through some other avenue for approval, it's really good to let your HUD point of contact know so that HUD can follow up with that agency as appropriate. In the case that you actually go ahead and approve that agency to join your network, there's a few steps that take place. You would notify your HUD point of contact. The HUD point of contact would then update HUD's housing counseling system so that that information is properly reflected. And this also allows the agency to be eligible to participate in your NOFA application and to receive funding through the Comprehensive Counseling Grant or any other funding opportunities that come through HUD. It's really important to note here, though, that once you approve an agency to join your particular network, whether they were approved through some other avenue, for example, whether HUD directly HUD approved them, it's still important for you to know that you are responsible for making sure that they continue to meet those criteria and that they remain in compliance and provide quality counseling. So this is true even if they were already HUD approved through HUD and they are now joining your network. So let's just talk about a couple of recommended steps that can help facilitate this process and ensure that that you really do a thorough process in reviewing these agencies. So again, we talked about the application is initiated. That may be an agency seeking to just join your particular network, or maybe you've decided that you want to expand into a particular geographic area or a particular service area. You can also solicit applications and market your network. However that agency comes to you, it is, again, very strongly recommended that you have criteria that outline what makes an agency a good fit for your particular network. You don't want to have sort of honest requirements that are just so far above and beyond HUD's requirements that that agencies don't want to join or it becomes too difficult, but it is important to think about network fit, and we'll discuss that a bit more when we talk about right-sizing your network in the next webinar. You definitely want to review the application and conduct evaluation processes, and part of that, as you can see down on step 3, is that you research and verify the information on each section of your application. So, for example, you don't just take the agency's word that there are no other housing counseling agencies in the local community. You should go to the HUD website or do a Google search to verify that the information received is good information, and determine, for example, if there's anything that's listed out there that suggests that this agency is not operating in a way that is consistent with the requirements that they've indicated that they fulfill on their application. We want to be sure that agencies, what they represent on paper is consistent with what's out there in the public view. Another thing that you should consider doing is conducting agency interviews, which can be done over the phone, or they can be done in person if you decide to do a site visit as a part of your approval process. It's really important to interview key people in key leadership positions, as well as senior or supervisory counselors who provide the agency's direct services. Just find out, in addition to the things that are represented there on their resumes, for instance, if you review those, just find out if they actually appear to be competent in the areas that they've represented that they're competent in, and get a feel for whether the folks who you interface with at this agency during the interviews are those people that are appropriate to represent your network and to represent the HUD Housing Counseling Program. You can also, again, we talked about doing a second application review. Agencies will sometimes, with the criteria, even with all of the support, it's hard to understand every single piece of the requirements, and it's perfectly appropriate to give it a second review if you deem appropriate to provide technical assistance. So we talked about that. And then finally, we would recommend that you do a site visit if you can, that you can budget for a certain number of site visits for maybe agencies that are joining your network that have never been HUD approved. While remote reviews can suffice, and you can look at pictures and so forth of the facilities, where it's possible to do a site visit, those things are recommended. And just one final recommendation, I'm going to go back a screen, but not necessarily listed there, is that when you do go through that approval process, it's really a great idea to go ahead and issue a formal letter indicating what your decision was. So if it's a rejection or a requirement for them to take corrective action before you'll reassess their eligibility for the network, document that information in a letter and be specific about what the needs are in terms of why their application was deficient and what they need to do to correct those problems. If the agency is accepted into your network, you should also, again, issue a formal letter that just states that they're being accepted into your network, keeping in mind that that formal letter is not a replacement for any sort of formal grant agreement that would be done through an entirely different process. So with that, we are going to get into a poll and take some questions as soon as we find out if HUD has anything else to add. So I'm going to read the poll here. HUD, while people are taking the poll, if you could indicate if there's anything that I left out or that you want to underscore here, and then we'll take some questions from folks. So the question here is, do you have an eligibility evaluation process that includes the steps outlined on the previous slide? Your options are, yes, our process has all of these steps. Yes, our process includes some of these steps. We have some other process that does not include these steps, or we have no process in place. Go ahead and click the answer on your screen, and I'm going to turn it over to HUD.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, you brought up a lot of great points. This is Javon Bly speaking. And the most important thing was, clear guidance. You don't want confusion throughout your network. You want to make sure that you're very clear and that you're reflecting what HUD is reflecting. If you at least reflect what HUD is reflecting, you know that you've already met that criteria. You brought up a good point about just significant issues that may be within an agency. So when you're doing your interview, you want to make sure that you ask about conflicts of interest and, see if they have any, so that if you do onboard them into your network, you know that they're going to need disclosures and things to go with that particular type of conflict of interest that they may have. And then also in the interview process, you want to look at significant issues that she brought up. You want to talk about, make sure that the board doesn't have anybody on there that they really don't need to have on there, or that the training certificates are all there and that the people are trained for the services that they're trying to provide. And the last thing would be about vetting already approved agencies. That was a very good point, because sometimes agencies leave and come back into the program, or they go find another sub-grantee. So it's good to vet them and see that they, are still following all the guidance that they are supposed to be following, and that they are vetted and ready, and that they're still trained to move forward, because they may have left for some other reason that may have been derogatory from another agency. And that was it, Aisha.
Great. Thank you so much, Devon. Ruth or Rhonda, do you guys have anything to add here, or do you all want to move to questions?
I'll just add, I thought that was excellent as well. What I wanted to add was, in terms of approving new affiliates to join your network, how important communication is regarding the expectations that you have and the role and responsibilities of those affiliates, and to communicate that clearly and upfront, so that the affiliates are very much aware of what will be expected to do, as a member of your network and as a part of HUD's housing counseling program. So everything from, maintaining their continuing to meet the requirements, reporting, use of client management systems, making sure all of those things are clear to them up front upon accepting their membership to your network.
Great, thank you so much. Rhonda, anything to add, or do we have any, or do you want to move to questions?
Well, we can move on. They're all good tips so far. Thank you.
Great. Do you have any questions?
I think we'll have Chantel read the poll results, and then I do have a couple questions in the queue.
Okay, great.
Okay, right now I am sharing the results. We have 36% voted at yes, our process has all of the steps. 46% voted yes, our process includes some of the steps. 7% voted at other process does not include the steps. And 11% voted we have no process.
Oh, wow, okay. That's quite a spread there. And also, I would say, good information for us to have as we think about more targeted technical assistance tools, and as HUD thinks through what they'll do to support you guys for this, to be sure that we're all on the same page and are moving forward in the same way. Thank you.
So Aisha, we have two questions that are written in. I'm going to do low-hanging fruit. The first one is there an available template of what questions to ask when doing an agency interview? Funny you would ask that, because we are actually working on a toolkit on this topic about adding agencies to your network. So there will be a template with questions. I think the next one is opening up to all presenters. Do we have to accept applications from new housing counseling agencies we do not wish to expand our network to, or if we do not wish to expand our network? In other words, do you have to allow a new housing counseling agency to apply, even if the oversight agency does not want to expand?
Rhonda, you want to take it?
I was going to say Ruth, but
Oh.
at this point,
I'm happy to.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
All I was going to say we are leaving the intermediary. It's the intermediary's decision or the state agency's decision to determine how they want to network with organizations and when, and so it's at their discretion if they want to take an application or not. And hopefully it would give that entity a reason why they are not at that time taking that application.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm sorry, before we move on, Aisha, so one question, and actually if you can go back to the flow chart that you had, and then I can provide this question. So this person is asking about, do organizations need to apply by themselves for HUD approval before an intermediary can adopt them into their network? In other words, do you have to have this HUD approval before joining a network? So I wanted to make sure that you flash the slide here that talks about there are really two paths here, and so you know, you do not have to have that HUD approval before joining the intermediary network. That's it for now.
Yeah. I didn't know, Ruth, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that before I move forward?
No, I think that's right, that an agency does not have to be HUD approved to be an affiliate of an intermediary state housing finance agency. That is really up to an organization whether they want to come directly to HUD to seek approval. It's not a prerequisite to join a network, or that's not a criteria for HUD.
Okay, great, thank you. So then the only thing that was required if you don't go directly to HUD is that oversight agencies make sure that anyone in the network either meet or exceed the criteria we're going to get into today. So thank you for that. Right. Okay, so now that we've sort of seen the bird's eye view of the process for joining one of your housing counseling networks, I want to talk about just some additional roles and responsibilities that are tangential to the process of joining a network. And again, like some of the material we've covered, this has already been covered in some previous webinars that we've had. So in general, HUD's role is to provide technical assistance and guidance to the oversight agency and to conduct its own quality assurance process by occasionally auditing, for example, a sample of doing a performance review or having a formal third-party audit of some of your affiliates or network agencies. So HUD, again, they in this three-person partnership that we talked about, yes, you as the intermediary or state housing finance agency, or in the case of if you're an MSO or an LHCA and you have branches, HUD is going to provide direct technical assistance and monitor the performance by sampling out of your branches or some of your affiliates in your network. So it's really important as we look at the oversight agency roles and responsibilities that you take your role as a partner with HUD and as a representative who sometimes does some things on behalf of HUD, for example, administering funding and so forth. You have to take that leadership role very seriously, and that means that you have accountability for all of the agencies, both funded and unfunded affiliates in your network. This is really important. Again, so with regard to today's eligibility criteria, not only do new agencies have to meet the criteria, not only do existing agencies who are already participating have to continue to meet those criteria, but both sets of players there have to meet those criteria at all times, whether they are participating in a grant or not participating in a grant. And you are responsible for them if they are in your network. Part of that, you can see the bottom bullet there, is that you also provide technical assistance and training yourself. Certainly HUD's webinars and content are open and available to for everyone to see, but as as a party who is responsible for assuring program compliance and quality counseling, the onus is on you in large part as an oversight agency to make sure that that those things are carried out by your agencies and that you properly support them through training and technical assistance to be able to do that. And then finally, with regard to the network agency's roles and responsibility or your affiliates, I'd say they take on a significant share, if not the lion's share of responsibilities, because they have to not only implement the housing counseling program, right, so they're your arms and legs that actually touch the clients through direct services, and there's accountability to their clients, but they also have to remain in compliance at all times with both HUD criteria that we're going to talk about, as well as your network criteria. So, for example, if you require that they use a certain housing counseling, a certain client management system, and you want to be sure that their stuff is updated on a monthly basis, that you're checking it on a monthly basis, or they have their client files or their disclosures a certain way that meets HUD's requirements as well as yours, they have to live up to all of those expectations and responsibilities, which is a tall order. And then also, just because you and HUD have those oversight responsibilities with regards to the agencies, that does not relieve any affiliate of their requirement for self-monitoring, oversight, and quality control. So they should have an internal quality control plan and process. They should have a supervisor who makes sure that everything is being carried out appropriately, and they should ensure that their staff undergoes continuing education as well as their own internal training processes. And then finally, communication and coordination with the oversight agency, and I would say that goes both ways. You communicate with them, they communicate with you. It is preferable for your affiliates to go through you when there is a question rather than going directly to HUD, although I know sometimes those things don't play out exactly the way we would like them to ideally. But again, communication proactively on both parts is really required there. And then finally, just as with you as an oversight agency, these network agencies are also subject to HUD's oversight as well as their authority. HUD has the final word on anything. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and get into these network criteria, these eligibility criteria that we keep talking so much about. And again, these can be found in Chapter 2 of your handbook. Sorry, give me just a moment. Is my slide advancing?
No.
Chantel, are you able to advance the slide? It seems that I've had some sort of a...
Okay, well, while you pause there for a second, we'll just deal with a couple more questions if you don't mind. One was a really good point. We had one of the folks wrote in and said they would like it if those that said that they had procedures on eligibility criteria, if they would share for those that do not have them in place. That would be great. You want to send those into HUD's email at housing.counseling@hud.gov or into your POC. Either way would work. That was one thing I wanted to cover. Oh, look, we're back up running. We were a second ago, Aisha.
Okay, I apologize for that. I don't know what happened here.
Okay, well, we can continue. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so are we running again?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the first criterion, which concerns an agency's nonprofit and tax-exempt status. It's only, just advance the first piece of guidance here. So only nonprofit agencies and government agencies can become HUD-approved housing counseling agencies or are eligible to participate in your network. And proof of eligibility must be maintained at all times. So this means that for new affiliates freshly joining the program by way of joining your network, they have to fulfill this requirement and fit one of those categories of eligible agencies. And for existing affiliates, they have to be able to provide proof that they are maintaining that eligible status. So this means you must be a 501c3, and you have to have a letter from the IRS or a statutory document from the local, state, or federal authority that authorizes you to operate if you're a government agency. So all of that talking just to say, you either have a 501c3, 501c letter from the IRS, or you have a signed and notarized document authorizing you to operate if you're a government agency. In addition, if you're a government agency, you also have to submit a HUD Form 9900, and that would be submitted electronically. And in terms of evaluating those particular documents, you can either have them in hand or you can review them electronically. You can also request documents during a performance review. For example, if you wanted to check that an existing affiliate is actually fulfilling the requirement to maintain eligibility, and if their certificate, if their approval certificate is expiring, that's also a good time to take a look at those documents. One question that often comes up in this particular instance is whether a state-level nonprofit status can suffice in place of an IRS granted status and letter. And the answer is no. You actually have to have something from the IRS that officially recognizes your organization's tax-exempt status. So we just want to talk about one exception here, and this is the state housing finance agencies. As a state housing finance agency, you do not have to complete the full Form 9900. You can participate through the NOFA process, or if it's not during NOFA season, as I call it, you can submit a written request to HUD to participate. The request would need to include a list of the affiliates who you're going to have, assurances that the affiliates meet the requirements that we're talking about today, that you would also need to complete Sections A, Section B, Part 1, Item 7, and also Section C of the Form 9900. So again, you don't have to do the whole thing, as would be the case for a regular government agency, but you do have to do some parts. Of course, like any other government agency, you would have to have a copy of the statutory authority to operate throughout the state. HUD, did you have anything to add on the state housing finance agencies just quickly before I move on?
All I would say, this is Javon, all I would say is just, make sure that even though they don't have to fill out the total 9900, which is the application to become HUD approved, there's a lot of good information in there that you can use to help tighten up your sub-grantee agreements and things of that nature, so that you can actually get a feel for what it is that all the subs do within that network, so that you know exactly what your network is doing.
Great, thank you so much. That is an excellent point. Okay, so let's take a look at the second criterion that is related to the affiliate, their experience. And so what this means is that they must have provided counseling for 1 year, 1 full year, in a way that is consistent with HUD standards that we're discussing today, of course, and as outlined in the entire handbook. So we're talking about, yes, they must meet these 15 criteria, but also the HUD handbook is something that you should become very familiar with, your affiliates should become very familiar with, because there are guidelines in there for how, for example, how the counseling process should take place. And an agency has to have demonstrated that they're doing that on an ongoing basis, and we'll talk about the documentation that demonstrates that. So again, for existing agencies who are already participating in the program, the requirement for you is that you have to maintain this standard, of course. So you can see here, one thing I just want to mention before moving forward is that you do need to provide an updated work plan when expanding your services. We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about right-sizing your network. But again, if you're an existing affiliate, you know, in the example, for instance, if you are adding HECM counseling as to your particular service offering, you must have a HECM certified counselor on staff. So existing affiliates in that case can't just keep doing what they've been doing all along. They have to update their work plan and then do the other additional steps that would be required to be sure that they're in compliance with requirements for other service offerings. The same thing would be true if, for example, maybe you've been providing default and delinquency counseling and education, and now with so many new opportunities, it looks like, you know, real pre-purchase is picking up, and you want to do home buyer education. Well, if that's something that you want to do, it also requires, as outlined in the HUD handbook, that you also provide pre-purchase counseling on related to that same topic. Because if you have group education in one area, you have to be able to offer one-on-one counseling in that area. So that's a really big thing to talk about when you to look at when you're talking about existing affiliates and whether they're continuing to meet those experience requirements. Documentation for these items, these are just a few examples. There's a lot of documentation you can look at. First and foremost, client files. You'll recall that I mentioned that there are other requirements outside of those things that are in these eligibility criteria in the handbook. I want to say Chapter 6, HUD, correct me if I'm wrong, gets into the different steps in the counseling process, and the client files are going to be the main place where you can see if those steps have been taken and if they're documented, because they're required to be documented in the file. In addition, you have to have your required forms. So you have disclosures, for example, the client data release forms, or client counselor agreement. Those are examples of things that, again, aren't in the aren't explicitly mentioned in this criteria, in these 15 criteria, but that are discussed elsewhere in the handbook and in the requirements. You see here being able to provide proof of registration with a CMS or client management system that's compatible with the HCS system. And then finally, being able to provide proof of signage, locked file cabinets, and private counseling rooms. Those are just examples of documentation that can be provided. And when you're looking to evaluate those, remote review is fine. You can also look at them in person if you're doing a site visit. And, again, we talked about interviewing staff. And if the agency wants to take pictures and send those materials to you in lieu of you doing a site visit, that's perfectly acceptable as well. And I apologize that wasn't sitting up on the screen, so just so everyone has a chance to take a look at that. Okay, so moving on to the third criteria, which relates to fair housing and civil rights compliance. What you need to know here is that an agency cannot have unresolved fair housing or civil rights violations at the time of application for approval. And again, with existing affiliates, you can't have any outstanding civil rights issues that are not resolved to HUD satisfaction. So that's the way to interpret that first paragraph under there, that first sentence under there. In addition to not doing anything wrong, you have to proactively do things right. And so in this case, for both new affiliates and existing affiliates, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're actively engaged in affirmatively furthering fair housing activities. Documentation that you can provide in review concerning these particular requirements. You can collect copies of materials or marketing materials. You can review client and education files to be sure that they're actually conducting those activities as they've outlined. For fair housing violations, you can check HUD.gov for fair housing complaints, and you can also run a quick search of public records. HUD doesn't expect you to be doing sort of in-depth things like checking LexisNexis or anything like that, but a simple Google search just to be sure there are no red flags in this area or any concerns that may need further investigation are sufficient. Of course, an agency would need to disclose this information if there is any problems, and if there have been problems in the past, it's really important that that they're able to produce and that you review a letter from HUD that says that those previous violations have been addressed to HUD satisfaction. Okay, so the fourth criterion. This deals with ineligible participants, as you can see. And basically what this means is that any agency participating in HUD's housing counseling program or wanting to newly participate, they cannot do so if any of the board members, staff, or volunteers have any of those things that you see listed here. So, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about criminal offenses, but outstanding tax liens without having some sort of a documented payment plan, defaulted loans, unsatisfied judgments or foreclosures of an FHA-insured mortgage. You really have to make sure that you're vetting any person who's affiliated with those agencies. Again, as an affiliate, those agencies need to be conducting their own due diligence, but then you as an oversight agency need to be conducting some level of due diligence. I want to just read here the text that is directly from the reg before I talk about documentation, and that is that members of the board of directors, staff, or volunteers cannot have been indicted for or convicted of a criminal offense that reflects upon the responsibility, integrity, or ability of the agency to participate in housing counseling activities. So what I want to say about criminal offenses, which I mentioned I would come back to, it's not that people can't have any criminal offenses in their past, but we want to be focused on those things that are directly reflecting on their ability to operate a housing counseling program, and that might give clients or HUD or anybody pause with regard to the integrity of the program as a result of any one person that is helping to administer the program. Documentation of this information, you can take a look at self-certification. In fact, I encourage self-certifications because that holds the affiliate accountable. You can also take a look at any ethics or disclosure forms that have been signed by board members and managers and staff, volunteers even. that's always a good idea because, again, that passes on the accountability, doesn't pass on, but shares the accountability with the actual people who are representing certain things about themselves. You can check the Federal Elections Commission website, and you can also, again, do just a limited public records search and review and collect ethics materials or self-certifications. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to say here. If you decide that due to a particular issue like this that you are not going to offer an agency membership, you're not going to extend an offer of membership to your network, you need to collect the evidence that you find, or whatever the reason is that related to that decision. And we talked a little bit earlier about providing a letter that documents that decision. I would append it to that letter. So we're going to talk about this criterion, and then we're going to take just another little poll. The fifth one talks about the community base. New agencies, we talked about must have functioned for a year in a couple of criteria ago in accordance with HUD's criteria, but also in the case of the community base, they must have operated and functioned for a year in any geographic service area that they propose to serve. So agencies already participating, they have to maintain the ability to function and operate in those geographic areas. In addition, what is different for existing affiliates is that they have the additional requirement that they have to maintain a minimum caseload of 30 clients annually. And the only exception to this minimum 30 client requirement is for reverse mortgage counseling. Documentation of this includes articles of incorporation, authorization to do business, certificates of good standing, an updated work plan if they, for example, are expanding to another market, and evidence of those 30 persons, which could be found just by taking a look at their 99, for example. And in this case, remote review of the materials of documentation will suffice just fine. So now we're going to go ahead and take another poll, get some additional input from HUD, and take your questions. So for which of the following criteria would you like additional guidance? Is it criterion 1, regarding the nonprofit and tax-exempt status? Is it criterion number 2, where we talked about the experience? Again, that had to do with making sure you're meeting all of the handbook requirements. Criterion 3, fair housing and civil rights compliance. Criterion 4, which deals with ineligible participants, and that was kind of a murky one there, so perhaps people have questions there because there can be so many exceptions. And then finally, criterion 5, the community base, which we just talked about. Go ahead and click your screen, and we will take some questions in just a moment.
We have a ton of questions on the 1 year. I mean, I'm furiously typing and trying to help folks, but I need to ask a bunch of questions while you get some HUD feedback, but I just want to let folks know.
Great. HUD, did you want to underscore any of the items that we talked about? There was just a lot there.
Yeah, you covered a lot of good information. One of the things I would say is you covered about eligibility and checking eligibility. When we're looking at evaluating, let's say that you're evaluating the sub-grantee, you know, the time to check their eligibility, you want to make sure you're checking because before you give them funding, you want to make sure you check the eligibility. You want to make sure they're worthy of being funded, that they're a reputable agency. And then you want to make sure that under criteria 1, you want to ensure that the counselors have the certifications and education that meets or exceeds the services that they're attempting to provide, that they want to provide for you within your network. And then you want to, you know, and the way you could do that, you could just check simply to see if they've adopted industry standards, to see, you know, what kind of standards they hold their counselors to. And they should also have a good oversight plan as well. That would also help you because it will go along with your sub-grantee agreement, and it will be part of that overall plan that you're going to submit or that they submit to you, so that you can see how they're going to oversee their counselors, so that, you know, that takes care of any complaints that you may get because you have that counselor oversight plan. And if they're looking at their counselors' plans, their counselors' files quarterly, you bring different things to light that they're doing correct as well as substandardly. And then for evaluation, for criteria 2, when you're doing if you're going to choose to do remote, basically you can do either, but I would prefer, I would say that you need to do an on-site as well as you can, unless you have somebody reputable to go out and look at that site for you. And you need to, what you see on paper, what they submit to you on paper paints a picture, and it should be what you see in action when you go out to the actual site. So I'll just cut it right there. It should just be kind of congruent. And then as far as for ineligible participants, criteria 4, you just want to make sure, everything kind of cross-checks. So you want to make sure that there's nothing in there as far as larceny or theft or something like that where, the mishandling of funds, those are the main things up top that you really want to look at. Anything that is going to pose a problem, but those are some of the things that may draw something to your eye. And then for community-based, you touched on the 9902. So a lot of these areas shake hands with each other. And so you'll be able to see, for instance, community-based is going to address that year that they've been performing off into their community, and then that 9902 is going to spread those activities out so that we can see, or that you could see, where they had actually performed. And so that will be a cross-check for you there as when you're looking at counselor education, because what service they can only provide the services in the community that that the counselors are approved for, that they've already been trained in. And that was all I had, Aisha.
That was so much rich information. Thank you for that. Shauna, you said you had a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions on the 1 year. So we're getting to these. So the first one is, if a longstanding nonprofit is adding a housing component and they are able to show HUD qualifications in place, do they have to have 1 year of counseling experience, or can the oversight agency request approval earlier than this period?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that real quick?
Yeah, we might need to have Mr. Salazar actually ask this, maybe more specifically, but I will repeat it. If a longstanding nonprofit is adding a housing component and they are able to show HUD qualifications in place, do they have to have the 1 year of counseling experience, or can the OA request approval earlier than this period?
I see.
So do they have to have the 1 year, basically? That's what they're asking.
The 1 year is for when they're, for the services that they're trying to provide when they come in. Once they get onboarded into HUD and they already have a working work plan, if they've got counselors that have been approved in the area that they're looking to add, then it wouldn't be a problem. They could go ahead and add that. But if they don't have a counselor that is certified to train in that area, to counsel in that area, then they wouldn't be able to approve that for them ahead of time. I wouldn't approve it for them ahead of time.
So can I ask Javon and others, so because the way I heard that, Shauna, is it okay to have sort of general housing experience if you're a nonprofit that's done things in the area of housing, or do you specifically have to sort of be doing counseling with all of the documentation and all of that for 1 year? Is there a difference between sort of that more tangible, concrete experience or a sort of general housing experience that maybe is a little more loose?
Is that to me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, ma'am. I would just still say they have to have the experience. Experience is what it's going to be, because it's going to cut down on everything in the back end as well, as far as technical assistance, as far as knowing where to report, when to report to the parent. All of those things, they may not want to look at taking on inexperience that way, because it's going to create more of a glut on the technical assistance end for them on the end. And that's something that they see a service that really needs to be provided, that they're willing to put in the time and train that individual agency for.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I believe the other question that I had was a state HFA. They're asking again, under a year, is that okay in terms of the experience? So we will leave it as the answer that Javon just went over. The other one is on the IRS. Okay, so if a brand new nonprofit wants to join as a new affiliate, should there be a tax-exempt organization by the IRS before providing housing counseling for a year to meet the one-year criteria, and it's a subsidiary of the parent organization, which is the requirement. So this is, it sounds like this is about the a possible parent agency having the 501c3 and then also a subsidiary, and where the one-year requirement comes in.
Yeah, I'm thinking they're going to have the 1 year requirement. And on the question right before that, when you talked about the state housing finance agencies, they're held to a different criteria because they may have already been sub-allocating funds and have experience in being an intermediary in other programs. So it would be different with a with a state housing finance agency versus a local.
So to clarify and confirm then, Javon, you have to have been a nonprofit. You have to have had that status for 1 year. That's part of the 1 year criteria.
Right. If they have their nonprofit for a year, they're going to be straight. They'll be okay to apply, but they're going to have to show experience.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we again, we have a toolkit that's coming out that will kind of go over some of the HUD approval criteria. It sounds like we can keep the 1 year in mind and offer some additional support there. The next one is when the new housing counseling certification standards kick in, how will an agency get the experience if they cannot get their counselor certified to do the work? Isn't it a vicious cycle?
Right, and that's where, you know, coming in, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ruth.
Javon, I was going to say, if this is a question regarding the new certification rule, we can't really speak to any questions regarding the rule or the implementation of the rule since it's not final at this point yet.
But in the meantime, this is Rhonda, that the online tools to get ready for certification and stuff is there to, you know, practice tests and things of that nature is already out there. So any new potential affiliate can already go out online and read, see the study guides and things of that nature, so they can prepare. But I just wanted to add to Javon's comment about the 1 year experience for that long-standing nonprofit that's been doing other housing work, but not necessarily housing counseling. That's great that you have that community experience overall in other programs, but we're still seeking that experience, how you're going to roll in your counseling program, of course, depending on the type of topic that you're going to do as well, and where did the training come from for those counselors that are going to do that particular housing counseling activity or activities, you know, in default counseling or pre-purchase counseling or rental counseling for that matter. So that's why we're focused so much on the 1 year criteria, that you're a nonprofit, been around providing other services and are expanding into the housing counseling arena. That's great, but we just still want to be sure that you know what you're getting yourself into on our criteria on your record keeping, and you know what a counseling file is all about.
Okay, there are two other people who wrote in about the 1 year. It just seems like we need to address that a little bit more in the toolkit that's coming out. And we are working on the toolkit right now, so we hope over the next couple weeks to get that published. So I'm not going to read those out if folks don't mind. I think I have one other question. I'm sorry. Okay, so I think this relates to Rhonda covering the certification. So her question is, at this point, HUD does not require agencies to employ counselors with any specific certifications, correct? They just have to show proof that they're trained.
They're trained and have experience in their background, that they have some housing counseling focus, you know, in their background.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We have so many more criteria. We have 10 more to cover. I'm going to suggest, if it's okay, that we get a look at the poll results. I kind of am curious about what it'll show, where people need more TA, although it looks like Shauna's questions are kind of maybe giving us a preview there.
Okay, we have 15% voted at nonprofit and tax-exempt status, 24% voted experience, 21% at fair housing and civil rights compliance, 33% at ineligible participants, and 6% voted community-based.
Wow. Okay. Again, a pretty even spread there. Thank you so much for that, Chantel. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into Criterion 6, which deals with record keeping and reporting. This one is actually fairly straightforward. Client files have to be kept locked and confidential, whether they are maintained physically or electronically, and the agency must be able to produce aggregate reports in the form of a 9902 using their client management system. To provide proof that these eligibility and compliance measures are being properly implemented, both new affiliates as well as currently participating affiliates, they can provide pictures, or they can provide pictures of written descriptions of their methods and tools for maintaining files. So, for example, provide pictures of the locked file cabinets. Of course, being able to produce that 9902, that's the surest way to be able to demonstrate that. So we want the most recent 9902. And then with regard to your evaluation strategies, it is perfectly fine for the agency to remotely review pictures or other materials such as that 9902. The only thing I would say is that for this and for any criteria that we talk about, if you have an agency that's been in your network for a while and you're reassessing, then this type of a thing would be knowing that they're going to have their 9902. You should know that anyway if you're fulfilling your job requirements as an oversight agency with regard to reporting, and you should have some level of confidence based on pictures or having been there with that their pictures that they provided are still in place. But if it's a new agency and you've never been there, whether it's regard to locked cabinets or any of the other materials content we cover today, I would go try to take a site visit, especially before subgranting to them, because if your record keeping and reporting things are off base, for example, if you're not keeping materials for 3 years or whatever the additional requirements are, that can have real consequences for not only the agencies or the recapture of funds, but it can jeopardize your entire network because your network, even though one agency made the error in this or another place, funding recapture is something that HUD takes very seriously, and again reflects on the entire network or the oversight of the agency's ability to manage that network. So the seventh requirement is on the client management system. Basically, you need to have a client management system that is compatible with HUD's housing counseling system or their HCS. And then you must be actively using the system and be able to demonstrate that client data is being properly input into the system. So that means that for existing agencies in particular, that they need to be transferring that data into HCS regularly as required for reporting. And then for new agencies, you need to be able to see that their client management system is reflective of the information that is reflected in their client counseling files, their physical files. In terms of documentation, you know, you can always check and see, you know, is HDS chronically out of date? You know, just by going into the HDS system itself, that would be cause for concern. Are there large data gaps in their CMS? For new agencies, they should have they can have a signed statement indicating the client management system that they use, or they can have a bill or registration form associated with the client management system. In terms of your verification methods, in addition to those items that I just mentioned, checking HDS and looking at data, you can also verify that you can also take a look at their platform actually remotely through a platform such as Join Me. And you can also do on-site verification. And in fact, when you are on-site at an agency, I, again, really encourage you to not just look at the physical client file, but sit down at one of the desks and take a look inside their client management system to be sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. The special case here, when it comes to agencies that do not have a commercial CMS system like Counselor Max or HCO, then they have to provide proof that their client management system is one that interfaces with the HCS system, with HUD's HCS. And that can be found by visiting HUD's website. Alternatively, in the case of some new agencies, some client management system vendors actually won't sell their system or offer up registration with the system for a new entity until they can actually demonstrate that they are going to participate in HUD's program. And so in that case, what you would ask for is some sort of a letter from the from the CMS vendor that basically states their commitment to provide access to the system after the agency is approved for participation in the program. Agencies that are still working on getting their systems to interface with HDS, they can manually enter data until they're able to get their system up and going, but they do have to be manually entering that data. So the ACE criterion as regards to counseling resources, and I think some of the questions were sort of getting into this a little bit earlier. So at the time of joining a network or verifying eligibility for ongoing participation in the HUD program, you have to meet the following minimum criteria. We can see those listed on the left-hand side of your screen. First of all, you have to have funding to serve a minimum of 30 clients over a 12-month period. You should take note here that it is not HUD's intention that they be the only funding source for your housing counseling program. You should have other funding that is sufficient to meet the 30 client minimum above and beyond whatever HUD is providing. At least 50% of your counselors must have 6 months experience, and the counselors must be fluent in the client's languages. Or if there are some languages that they're not fluent in, they must have access to an interpreter or provide access to an interpreter or a list of referral agencies. The agency also must be able to provide documents and information to persons with disabilities. Examples of documentation here include an operating budget with the most recent independent financial audit. You can have letters of commitment, contracts, and agreements. These are things like leverage funds that would sound familiar to you guys, that show that they can sustain that enough funding for 30 clients, to serve at least 30 clients. A counselor roster, so you know who their counselors are, that they're trained. You can take a look at their resumes and their training certifications. And then a written statement concerning the languages that services will be provided in. Also making that statement should talk about should we state that the counselors are fluent, and then if there's any referral agreements or MOUs with interpreting agencies, and those are also good to provide. For a review of these materials, a remote review is fine. It's recommended that you review these materials within the context of the Housing Counseling Work Plan. So the point here that I just want to underscore is that they shouldn't just be, if I'm an agency and I'm coming to you and I'm saying I'm going to serve 1,000 clients and I only have enough funding to serve 30 clients, that doesn't match my work plan. So anything that you look at in terms of the guidance on the left-hand side of the column that we talked about, and the work plan, you need to make sure that they match up. And the same thing is true with those leverage funds. And then also, in terms of people who are reviewing the budget and the operating budget, what I would just say here is that you need to ensure that whatever staff member is reviewing the budget and audit information, that they have the appropriate expertise to understand what it is that they're looking at. And I know that some oversight agencies actually rely on their accounting department to help them to evaluate this information. Okay, so criterion number 9 deals with the knowledge of HUD programs and the market. And for both new and existing affiliates, the standard is the same. You must have staff that are knowledgeable about the community that you're proposing to serve, and you need to know about HUD programs and resources. This is where you know, the interviews come in. In addition, you need to know the counseling area that you're going to be, or education area you're going to be provided. If you're saying you're going to be doing pre-purchase counseling and you only have default and delinquency experience, you need to make sure that agency brings on a counselor that's knowledgeable about pre-purchase and home buyer education. Agencies can provide staff training and certificates and resumes to substantiate that they have knowledge of the local market and HUD programs. The Housing Counseling Work Plan, this is really important. It should show nuanced data and information. Again, the Housing Counseling Work Plan, in addition to making sure that your staff know what they're talking about and understand your market and your consumers, that work plan is the demonstration to HUD that as an agency, you understand your market overall. And so I've actually seen in the past like canned work plans that I don't know, there's some clip notes version on the internet or something like that. The bottom line here is that the data should be nuanced and specific to the particular market. So that's just what I want to say about the work plan there. For agencies that are participating already, quarterly reports are a good source of information about whether they're maintaining knowledgeable staff. If an agency's report starts showing diminished staff capacity or diminished ability to send down money that's been earmarked for counselor salaries, that's a red flag that they may no longer be in compliance with this eligibility requirement or maybe some other eligibility requirement. We talked about interviewing staff in terms of evaluation criteria. You can remotely review staff training certificates and resumes, and again, taking a good look at that work plan, not just verifying that they have one, but verifying the information that's in it. That's what's important. And then, of course, for existing affiliates, you want to be on an ongoing basis monitoring their implementation of services to make sure that any service they're providing is consistent with what's in their work plan. That's also part of the knowing the HUD programs and services that you're providing. Okay, and so criterion 10 And after this, we'll take another poll and take a break for questions. This deals with service contracts and agreements. For this requirement, basically the guidance here is that an agency cannot contract with another company to fulfill the services it proposes to offer. So I'm going to offer up these services, but I'm going to contract them out. That's not allowed except in the case of two exceptions. The first exception is in the case of an oversight agency. So again, an intermediary state housing finance agency. Clearly, you guys are subcontracting with affiliates in your networks to provide those services. So that's the case for all of you on the phone. And then the second exception is when HUD provides a letter of approval for subcontracted counseling services. And that would happen, for example, if there's an area where there is no housing counseling agency, but perhaps you want to subcontract to an agency that has some presence there, even if your agency can't be the bricks and mortar there. If an agency comes to you with the second exception, then you would need to talk to your HUD POC about that particular information. And if they're claiming that they've already met that requirement, then you would need to have a letter from HUD indicating that exception is in fact true. And then a good way to verify this information is actually to take a look at the agency, take a look at their tax forms. If they are issuing a 1099 or an MOU or something to some outside entity, and we're not talking about specific staff here, we're talking about outside agencies to provide their counseling services that are in their work plan, then that should be a red flag for you. Again, you can remotely review these materials, whether or you can also do them in person. Just want to underscore here before moving on to the poll and the questions that, again, you can have contract counselors. So I want to draw the distinction here between talking about a contracted agency altogether and having maybe a 1099 or a W-9 counselor who is providing services. So with that, let's get into the poll question, and we'll take some questions and some comments from HUD. For which of the following criteria would you like additional guidance? Is it Criterion 6 on record keeping and reporting? Is it Criterion 7 on the client management system? Is it Criterion 8 on the counseling resources? That one I imagine is probably pretty big for some folks. Is it number 9 on knowledge of HUD programs and the market? Or is it Criterion 10, service contracts and agreements? Go ahead and click your answer on your screen. And HUD, do you want to go ahead and make some comments while Shauna gets to look at the questions we have?
Yeah, this is Javon. On record keeping, you mentioned data gaps in the CMS. So when you're evaluating possible sub-grantees for coming into your network, you just want to, that CMS is the way you verify that the work is being done and that they understand how to capture client data. So you want to make sure that, a simple thing you can do is when you do an on-site or you actually are doing something remote, have them send a client list of the stuff that they've done over the past year or last 6 months or a certain time frame, and then when you actually go there, see if they can pull that actual file number up in their CMS so that you can see if, how they keep their client files, how are they managed. You also want to look at their hard copy files to see if they have a particular stack order. That lets you know the organization of the minds of the counselors, how are they organized. Is everything just thrown in a file, or does it have a particular stack order? And then you may, as part of your sub-grantee agreement, you may want to put that in there that they keep a certain stack order so that when you come out to audit that stuff is there, that you can actually find it readily and you can get to outcomes, because that's what you want to be able to see when you're looking at those files. And so that will actually help you to go back, and that will shake hands with the community-based portion, and you'll actually be able to see, what they've been doing in the community, and these were the outcomes. The other thing was about counseling counseling resources. You talked about financial audits. Some of the smaller agencies may have problems with their audit or something. You have to just see exactly, what those problems are. Sometimes they're not big problems. It could just be something where they don't have enough staff available to perform all the functions, and sometimes that's what we see in audits. The other thing is on congruency of work plan and funding. You touched on that. I'll just go into sometimes you're going to have in-kind funding with your subgrantees. They may be getting, say, that their location for counseling may be provided by in-kind. So you want to make sure that they just have an agreement for that, some type of agreement in place so that they don't show up one day and then can't counsel in that location that was provided for them in kind. So you just want to make sure that everything is in place for them. You just want to know, like she brought up a good point about whoever's looking at those statements needs to know what they're looking at. You also want to just know how to kind of weight that in-kind activity if they have a whole lot of in-kind. That could be a flag. So you just want to make sure you want to see if they actually have some cash on hand as well. And then criteria 9 was the interview. Let me see, I said interview about programs and services. You just want to make sure when you're interviewing, you want to look at the programs and services they provide and just make sure that, once again, that you may want to just ask, what services do you provide, and to see if they know the disclosures and whatnot that go with that particular program. That will let you know if they have knowledge of HUD programs. For instance, if they're doing pre-purchase, do they know about the disclosures that go along with the pre-purchase program? So that was all I had. I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Your comments are just incredibly enriching and helpful in this context. Shauna, did we have any questions that maybe you want to throw to Rhonda or Javon or Ruth?
Yeah, just a couple. So can subgrantees subcontract with online housing education providers such as eHome or Framework?
eHome America is available to use. It's not contracted out per se. That's something that they add into their work plan and state that they're going to use eHome America as a pre-purchase program. And then also that brings on a good point. If you're doing online counseling or over the phone counseling, you want to ensure that you have disclosures in place for that as well on how you're disclosing to the client if you're not doing face-to-face.
Okay, the next one is, are subcontractors allowed as presenters for workshops as long as the agency is conducting all of the one-on-one counseling that may occur as a result of the workshop?
I'm sorry, Rhonda or Ruth, I don't want to hog everything. You can go ahead if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, hi, this is Rhonda speaking on the homebuyer education. We do prefer that somebody from the counseling agency be there at that workshop to oversee what is being taught at that workshop. So you should have some training plan agreement with the trainers that are going to be providing those modules for your pre-purchase homebuyer education workshop, for example, that all these speakers from the private industry are helping you conduct those workshops, but a counselor should be there to oversee that information is there, not just leave it to this third-party entity doing all of it.
And Rhonda brings up a good point. Another thing when you're in a workshop, sometimes what agencies do is prior to having a professional come out and speak, they already have a disclosure with them signed that they understand that they're there to provide only educational information and that they're not there to sell their product. So they're there for informational purposes only.
Great, thank you.
And there's only one more about, like, if I'm an oversight agency and we receive a financial audit, what should they look for? And I'm just going to let folks know, and I'll go ahead and send the link in the questions. There was an entire presentation at the August meeting, August 5th, about how to prepare for your financial audit. So I will go ahead and send that link. No further questions.
Great. Can we get a look at those poll results before getting to the last 5 criteria?
Sure. Hold on one second. We have 28% voted at record keeping and reporting, 16% voted client management system, 16% voted counseling resources, 28% voted knowledge of HUD programs and market, 13% at service contracts and agreements.
Great, thank you. Another good spread of material. And at the end of the presentation, we'll provide an email that you can email in additional questions and so that we can flesh out both TA and toolkits, as well as hopefully be able to answer those questions for you one-on-one. Okay, so moving on to the last 5 criteria, let's take a look at number 11, which deals with community resources. Basically, this criterion means that the housing counseling agency has to demonstrate established working relationships with private and public community organizations. And these organizations would be the places where they would refer clients who need services that the agency itself cannot offer. In terms of showing the appropriate documentation, a description of those working relationships and partnerships should be documented or appended to their application to join your network. You know, again, if it's an existing agency, they should be maintaining a description of that information on hand, and then of course you can always be checking client files to see if those referrals and resources are being leveraged appropriately. And then while you can certainly take a look at that description, ideally what would be great is if the description can be substantiated by an actual signed partnership agreement or an MOU. In terms of the evaluation strategy, again, remote review is fine. Sometimes you want to save the site visit for things that are sort of more critical or not necessarily more critical, but things that can't be readily observed remotely. In this case, this is something that could be readily observed remotely if you had to. Okay, criterion number 12. This is for state and local requirements. This means that an agency, its branches, and its affiliates, so you as an oversight agency, any branches you have, any affiliates you have, must meet all state and local requirements in order to operate. The best way to verify this is to request their most recently renewed business registration or authorization to do business if they're existing. Well, even if they're a new affiliate, again, they should have been operating for at least a year, so you need to have that information on hand, and they should be able to provide that. A certificate of good standing or a self-certification if you absolutely had to go to a last resort, but really they should be able to provide something that shows that they can operate. You can also, in addition to reviewing that documentation, you can also check with the Secretary of State with the Secretary for that state or whoever oversees corporations for a particular state. You can see if the agency is still incorporated in the state or if there have been any violations that are noted. Of course, for issues that haven't bubbled to the surface yet, there's not really much you can do. You just need to, do what you can to stay abreast of what's going on with your agencies, and when there is a red flag, then you do additional investigation from there. With regard to the 13th requirement, which are for the facilities, all housing counseling facilities of the agencies and any branches, sub-grantees, affiliates, etc., they have to meet these bulleted requirements here. They have to have clearly and properly identified office space with space available for the provision of housing counseling services. And that sign has to be permanent, just sort of identifying the office. The office should operate during normal business hours and offer extended hours when necessary. The exception to this requirement is that if there's a certain branch offices that only have the resources, again, branch offices that only have the resources to operate on a part-time basis, but their services are critical to the community that they're in. So they're there because they're critical, but they're a branch and they only have the resources to do part-time. So that's for you MSOs and LHCAs out there. You also have to, the agency has to be able to provide a privacy for in-person counseling, and be able to have, again, the confidentiality of records, that things are kept under lock and key, that you don't go in there and see client files just laying out, or that counseling isn't happening in like a sort of a bullpen setting where everyone can hear what's going on. And then they should be able to provide accessibility features or make alternate accommodations for people with disabilities. To substantiate this, they can submit photographs or self-certifications along with a written description of how this is managed. Even with the photographs, I kind of like to just know a little bit about what their file management process is. So I really encourage you to have some sort of written description along with the self-certification or the photograph. You can remotely review this information and documentation. You can do an on-site review, and this is one of those things. Again, if you're weighing what to remotely review versus what to verify during an on-site, this is one of those things that I think falls into the second bucket. That you want to do it on-site. Before moving to the next criterion, I just want to add that this issue for existing agencies really probably shouldn't come up if they're already in your network, unless they have some huge funding cuts or they start moving offices. Then you want to get back out there, especially if they move, and see what's going on. Okay, so the 14th criterion, having to do with the agency's housing counseling work plan, and we talked about that. An agency has to be able to demonstrate that they have a housing counseling work plan that meets HUD requirements. We have the requirements listed out here. You have to cover the target geographic area and population. So where are you going to do it, and who are you going to do it for? It has to cover the issues and needs of the target population. So we're going to do it in this area with this group of people because this group of people has these particular issues or are underserved in this particular way, and have data to substantiate that. They also have to outline what the services that they're going to provide. So don't just identify the need, but say what you're going to do to fulfill those needs. And that has to always include affirmatively furthering fair housing and follow-up. So the description of services should share how they're going to do that information. The activities and the outcomes, or activity outcomes. So we're going to provide these services to meet these needs, and we expect our outcomes to look like this. We expect the impact or the changes in people's lives that we're working with to look like this. They also need to be able to demonstrate that they can provide the counseling and education services in alternative settings and formats. Again, for people who need those types of accommodations, as well as non-English speaking or limited English proficiency clients. They need to be able to show that they can accommodate that. We talked earlier about interpreters and so forth if you're not fluent. And then if you are going to have service fees, we need to see what the fee schedule is and what that looks like. So in terms of being able to show that, the documentation, again, I mentioned this earlier, we're not just looking to check off, oh, yes, you have a work plan. We want to make sure there's reliable data. We want to make sure that the HUD-approved that the services they're talking about are actually services that are listed that can be HUD-approved, that it's not some sort of random other thing. So, for example, a food pantry is nice, but that's not a service that you can be HUD-approved to provide, so to speak. The specific strategies that they're going to be doing, they should be appropriate outcomes, and clear policies. That's really important, clear policies with regard to how the work plan is going to be implemented. In terms of evaluation, you can do a remote review of the work plan. And in fact, I would really encourage you to do a remote review of the work plan before you even go to the agency facility. You want to know what they're about, what they're doing, and derive the other material, your interpretation of the other material or the in-person visit from there. And then if they are going to be applying for funding, again, or even if they're not going to be applying for funding, they just want to join your network, you need to be sure that that plan is consistent with the other components that they're providing through your application, your network application process. And again, you want to check, is this work plan consistent with these materials, and is it feasible given what's represented in these other materials? And then finally, conflicts of interest and disclosure requirements. This one is a long one, so just brace yourselves. We've got a couple of slides on this. An agency must disclose any real or apparent conflicts of interest and describe how these conflicts are going to be mitigated. And this includes providing disclosures, includes but isn't limited to providing disclosures to clients. The agency must avoid conflicts of interest and actually go a step further by implementing quality control activities that help avoid potential conflicts of interest. Where conflicts of interest are apparent or even questionable, it's important that the agencies disclose these to the client in their disclosure, but also you have to disclose them to HUD. We recommend that agencies develop a conflict of interest policy for all employees, and that the employees should sign sign that policy in an acknowledgement that they understand it and that they are living up to it. That things like outside employment or employment of friends or family, that's just sort of broadly covered. So we talked about that you have to have the disclosure, the client disclosures. You have to disclose to HUD if there is any kind of conflict. You can have an agency self-certification that no conflicts exist, but I still think that you, and HUD can jump in here in a couple of slides, you need to probe that further through interviews, as Stefan mentioned earlier, but also through other documentation that substantiates that. And so in that case, it would be policies, conflict of interest policies, documents, the employee policy, et cetera. And then you can remotely review those materials, and you can follow up with HUD as necessary. One thing I do want to mention is that if an agency determines that there is some sort of conflict that has occurred, you have to take steps to notify HUD within 15 days. That's 15 days after the conflict occurred, and the actions that were taken. You have to let HUD know the actions that were taken to cure that particular conflict. And so a couple of important things to highlight here. There are 3 categories of conflict of interest that are outlined in Chapter 6 of your handbook. I believe it's Section 6-2. And the first one deals with a person of trust. I'm going to recommend that people go and read that, but I'm going to just make a couple of examples here. A director, an employee, a contractor, a volunteer, or someone who is related to them, a spouse, a child, a business partner, anybody. Those are people in positions of trust, and they have to avoid doing anything or taking any action that might result in or even create the appearance of a conflict of interest. And in this case, the first one there that you see is administering the housing counseling operation for private gain. You can't be providing preferential treatment to any organization or person to conduct activities that would be sort of out of compliance with the conflict of interest here. A direct interest is a conflict of interest that would arise if a person of trust, who we just talked about, with the organization or related to anyone in the organization, serves as an employee or for another agency that might have a direct interest in the client, or is negotiating future employment with an agency or organization that might have a direct interest in the client, just by virtue of their role. So, for example, if they're going to own or purchase a property that the client seeks to rent or purchase, or if they're, for example, going to serve as a collection agent for the client's mortgage lender or the landlord or the creditor, and you're up there providing default and delinquency counseling, that is a conflict of interest, a direct conflict of interest, dual employment or that kind of thing. The third one here is referrals. It is a conflict of interest if a person of trust, who we talked about just a few minutes ago, refers clients to entities that are going to be providing services to the client in which they can have personal gain. So I am making referrals to a realtor, and I'm married to the realtor, but all my pre-purchase counseling folks go to my spouse/realtor. Or if, for example, I am referring them to my friend, and my friend is going to try to give me some sort of fee for a referral fee. That type of thing is not permitted. So then finally, before we take the final poll and get to questions, there is no steering, and what this means is that you must always have, be sure that you give your clients, that you discuss alternatives with them, and that discussion of alternatives must be well documented in the client files. And so that's important there. And then finally, it's really important, again, that you as an oversight agency verify that the agency has their disclosures, and that those disclosures meet HUD's requirements. I would strongly recommend that you take a look at the disclosure form capacity building toolkit on the Office of Housing Counseling website. Again, that's a good guide for you. You're not required to use that particular that particular tool as a guide, but you are required to have a disclosure form that meets HUD's requirements, and that's just one that they've provided and tried to make it easy for you. That disclosure has to clearly state that the client is not obligated to receive any services offered by the organization or any of its partners. It must provide information on alternative services, programs, and products, and then finally, it must describe very explicitly the various types of services provided by the agency and any financial relationships between the agency and any other industry partner. Okay. So with that, I am going to get into the final poll, and we will take comments from HUD and questions from you guys. For which of the following criteria would you like additional guidance? Is it Criterion 11 on community resources, Criterion 12 on state and local requirements, Criterion 13 on facilities, Criterion 14 on the housing counseling work plan, or Criterion 15 on conflicts of interest and disclosure requirements? Go ahead and work on clicking the answer on your screen. And HUD, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, this is Javon on community resources. You want to make sure that you don't want to provide a list of every resource within your the agency shouldn't be providing to you every resource within their community. They should be providing you only those agencies that actually assist with providing some type of assistance to their clients. And then they should have a list of those agencies with a small description to the side of what those agencies actually provide, what type of services that they can provide. What this does is it helps you to know who your network is referring clients out to, and in case there's some type of complaint, it's in the work plan. You already know who their list of community partners are, and if there's a problem, you can always, narrow it down to exactly where they were referred and who they saw. So that's why you kind of want to make sure that you have the community resources locked into that. As far as just state and local requirements, you just want to make sure you vet your network and make sure that they keep an active status, that they're in compliance. As far as facilities go, as far as signage, sometimes it's hard to have signage at a place where, for instance, we have some places. I'm in Georgia. Sometimes we have agencies that are co-located, for instance, with a police department or a municipality that won't let them put up a sign. So what we do is make sure when we enter the building that they're on the marquee and that on their doors they have that stuff ready available, their operating hours and all the other things as per 7610 and the rest of the regulations. And for the work plan, you covered that great and beautifully, as well as the conflict of interest. You covered both of those beautifully. For the work plan, just again, the services, make sure that what they're applying to do for you in the network, out of those 14 services, you want to make sure that however many they have listed there in the beginning matches up with what they have in their work plan. So she covered that very great. And then for conflict of interest, the biggest thing, again, she covered all that great, which was steering. And you want to look at what would draw you to some of that is when you're going through their application, look at the other activities paragraph, and it breaks out if they're doing any other activities. If an agency states that they're doing other types of activities, then they're probably going to need some type of conflict of interest statement off the top, and that's when they probably won't be able to serve certified because they have other activities going on that wouldn't mesh with that. So, for instance, someone may be co-located with a real estate company or something like that in their other activities, so then they would have to disclose that type of information. But you just want to make sure you stay away from steering. And so for the disclosures, what you want to make sure is you just describe what you're doing on your disclosure. You want to provide any relationships that you have with industry partners. Again, you want to address any alternative services and programs and products that could cause or pose a conflict of interest, and then you want to have that conflict of interest policy like we just stated. And then for an additional step that you could do is recommended, but it's not necessary that you have to have it, is a client counselor agreement. And that's what she was talking about, our toolkit that's online. It's an agency, it says U.S. Department of HUD agency disclosure forms. Is required elements and best practices, and that's listed online, and it will break out all the different things what constitutes a conflict of interest and how to circumvent that, and as well as with the program disclosures. But that client counselor agreement, that's going to reduce your agency liability again, because it's going to state on that, after you've already stated what your services are, you stated your relationship to your industry partners, and then you stated the alternatives that you list for those clients. If you have one, you have to state alternatives. So you just want to make sure that you're stating alternatives and disclosing. And that's, in real estate we say location, location, location. Well, in counseling we say documentation, documentation, documentation. That's it.
Great, thank you so much. Anything to add, Ruth or Rhonda, before we move into questions? We are over time here, and we definitely want to get to folks' questions and show them the additional resources.
No, Javon's covered all of it, so carry on.
This is Ruth. I'll just make one comment. A lot of the criteria we've talked about, counseling resources and capacity to meet different program requirements. One thing that I think you touched on briefly, Aisha, but I also want to highlight is when you're evaluate applications from agencies, also to look at not only their financial resources, but their capacity to manage a federal grant. So you're not only talking to the program staff, the executive director, and others in the organization, but you want to talk to the finance department and learn about their accounting system and how they manage cost reimbursable grants. So the program and finance really have, the people work on program and people work on finance really have to work hand in hand, as you know, but you also want to have those conversations, with early on or as a part of your process, as a part of your application review process.
Excellent point, Ruth.
Thank you. Shauna, any questions?
Yeah, we have a ton. Do you mind if this time we at least get the results of the poll and then we can go into them? Some were brought up earlier, but I wanted to kind of save them to the end. So maybe we could do the poll first. Yeah.
Okay, we have 13% voted community resources, 16% voted state and local requirements, 0% voted as facilities, 47 voted housing counseling work plan, 25% voted conflicts of interest and disclosure requirements.
A good spread again. Shauna, do you want me to have the additional resources up on the screen while you're going through the questions?
Sure.
Or do you want to? Okay.
Sure, that's a good idea. Go ahead and advance the slide.
So I'm going to advance. There are two additional resources, two screens for additional resources. Again, these will be made available to you. The slides, actually, they've already been made available to you, so you have all the links that are available. But again, we have this for additional resources and this as well. And so now we're moving on to the wrap-up and Q&A.
Okay, great. And Aisha does have up the evaluation. I want to catch some of you that might be exiting the call to please fill out the evaluation. We take your comments very seriously on how we can improve in the future. And then, of course, the questions go into the housing.counseling@hud.gov. For those holding on, and thank you for all your questions. So just a handful of things. Back on slide 10, I'm sorry, Criterion 10.
Okay, I'm going to just scroll back there and we'll. Okay.
Okay, so there's one question on, you made the distinction between contracting with an entity and contracting with an individual counselor. Can you provide more clarification on that?
Sure. HUD, do you guys want to go ahead and take that?
I think just the quick distinction would be helpful.
Okay. So again, so some agencies have counselors on staff who are not the traditional W-2 type employees. They are contractors, and they fill out when they join your organization, they fill out what's called a W-9, and then at the conclusion of the federal tax year, that person would get what's called a 1099 as opposed to having a W-2. And so you are allowed to have counselors who would go through that process, or educators or whatever on staff that go through that process. So that's what technically a contractor is. However, if you are looking to contract out all of your services to another agency, so I've provided a work plan and I'm not actually going to be providing anything in that work plan, the agency down the street or in the next region over is going to be providing all of the services in that work plan, and I've contracted with that particular organization, then that is not allowed outside of the exceptions that we mentioned, which again are for oversight agencies, which is the case for all of you, our target audience for today's call, or if HUD has said that that's okay and has made that exception. And you would have to have a letter for that, or if you haven't gotten the letter yet, you would need to go and seek that letter.
Okay, anything else from HUD that they would add to that?
Nope, she hit it. I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Okay, and so can you go to Criterion 12 as well? Sorry, I think it's helpful because there's so many criterion here to go to the specific question. So this is, where would an agency need to go to get from the state or local government that their agency is certified? And I believe this is the authorization to do business, I hope. If not, we can unmute you and you can ask us verbally. But I believe that's what they're asking. Where do I go to get that authorization?
Yeah, They should have, each state usually has a place where you can go research your organizations. And so you should be able, it's going to be a state thing where you have to find out exactly where to go find out where they register in your state.
Okay, great.
For instance, here in Georgia, it would be the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, great. All right, and then I believe I have 2 on conflict of interest, so that's Criterion 15. So one person asked to please elaborate when the housing counselor is also a realtor.
That would have been disclosed up in their, when they first either got onboarded with the agency or when they became HUD approved, and that would have been, they would have already had their conflict of interest information put in there, or if there's an organization like that, they need to have their conflict of interest stuff already there, conflict of interest, steering agreements, just everything that they could possibly have, because you don't want to show that it's going to be impossible for you to show that you're not steering, almost, if you don't have that agreement in place. So you're going to have some type of conflict of interest statement for the agency prior to them, counseling someone.
Basically, we're saying that you've left your real estate license at the door to be a counseling agency, at a housing counseling agency. You are there to provide the counseling activities and not there to obtain a client for a personal gain to, help sell their property or whatever.
A great way to put that.
Okay, great. That was super helpful. Okay, this is, shouldn't agencies provide more than one agency that's offering a particular service if they are available? For example, providing information on agencies that offer services to veterans. Also, does the work plan have to be amended if they want to connect with additional community resources or become knowledgeable that an agency is no longer able to provide a service?
Yes, ma'am. That's a simple fix. They just get with their POC and just update their community resources. And that list will be there for them, and it will be with their work plan. So that's an easy fix. And it was a 2-part question. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
One was, no, I think you answered it, because the first one was, what if, basically they work with an agency that offers services to veterans, and then if they need to be amended when an agency no longer provides the service. I think you answered it.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. Okay, so a couple in the beginning that a few folks mentioned that I think HUD could just provide, weigh in a little bit on, which is, hold on one second. So the evaluation process is expensive to use. Does HUD provide any incentive, basically, in grant funding to encourage new agency participation?
Ruth, I'll let you handle that.
Well, this is Ruth. So, each agency has to decide about how large or small they want their network to be, how many agencies they can bring on in any given year. And our funds are flexible to use in terms of, they're available to use for those resources. For that, in order to help you cover those costs related to evaluating applications and onboarding.
Okay, great. And then this relates to compliance and kind of as an intermediary, their liability. What are the possible negative consequences for an intermediary if they discover non-compliance with one of their affiliates, even despite reasonable oversight efforts?
Well, what you want to do is, honesty is everything. So you want to make sure that, just see what the extent of the problem is so that it could be mitigated first, and if it's not something real serious, you want to work with the agency. If it's something that they need to be taken out of, take a reason why they need to be removed from your network, then you simply need to notify them and notify HUD that they won't be participating in your network. And if there's a reason why, something that's going to affect the grant or the reputation, then that needs to be stated to the policy who handles that particular agency, so that all that can be cleared up. But everything needs to be cleared and severed, so to speak, to make sure that everything is completed with that, if there's, whatever the reason may be. So for instance, I had an agency that we had to let go because they were doing some different types of services that they claimed that they were doing by work plan, but when we actually went out and saw, they were a bunch of lawyers and they didn't even have a counselor on hand. So they had lost their counselor, but they continued to try to do services because they were brand new. So they lost their counselor as soon as they got them. So when the counselor left, they should have immediately let HUD know that they lost their counselor, that they weren't able to counsel, and they shouldn't have been trying to take sub-grantee funds from their parent because they know they didn't have an eligible counselor. So if they needed to be removed because they're not getting ready to get another counselor anytime soon, then they can go on inactive status or something like that. Or they can just, put them on inactive status. This depends on what, there's different remedies for different situations. But honesty is the best policy.
Okay, so I think this is the final question unless somebody wants to be unmuted and ask something like verbally. So I'm trying to piece together, one person has provided this like in 3 parts, but I believe the question is about the HUD eligibility criteria that we went through and comparing it to the 9900, and it seems to be, at least to this person, that the criteria doesn't exactly match up. Yeah, can you help me out, Javon?
The 9900 and the 7610?
They're saying 9900 checklist, yep.
Right, the 7610.1 revision 5 has not been updated, so that 9900 has the most recent criteria. 7610 does outline the performance criteria and approval criteria. There's additional criteria on that 9900. So I always advise people to use the 9900 as well as, you with the handbook, so that you can meet all the criteria, make sure that you're catching everything. But that 9900 has everything on it. It's including some of the grant criteria.
Okay, so it's eligibility plus the grant criteria, and folks can use the information in this webinar that, again, has been provided to them, and then there'll be a subsequent toolkit. Sounds like all that would be helpful in the most recent. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Any other questions folks have? Does anyone want to be unmuted? Lots of folks said that you covered the conflict of interest very well, Aisha, so they're really looking forward to seeing some of that in the toolkit. Okay, the person who asked about the 9900 says, do all the questions have to be answered yes for the agency to be approved on the 9900?
We look at everything as a comprehensive picture, so we have to see what would be missing. I just would have to see. I would have to know what was missing in order to say yes or no. But we look at everything comprehensively.
Thank you, and I think that this is part of the tool that somebody asked early on. It might have been the same person. There will be questions to ask about all 15 criteria, and then there's a checklist, yes or no, and if something is yes or no, it'll say specifically the organization cannot be approved, things like that. So hopefully that checklist that's coming soon will be helpful to folks. Thank you for that, Javon. Okay, great. Anyone need to be unmuted? Any hands up, or are we at the end of the webinar? I'm sorry, this is a little bit over our 2 hours. Anybody, Chantal, that you're seeing?
Yes, we have one.
Okay.
Anna? I unmuted Anna. Did you have a question? Okay, so maybe it was by mistake. No other hands are raised.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I said it sounds like it sounds like that concludes us, Shauna.
Yeah, well, thanks, everyone. Please fill out the evaluation, and we look forward to talking to you on November 19th for right sizing, which is the companion piece to this particular webinar. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you so much.